Hi, everyone. We appreciate you showing up.
Hi, this is Jock, and I'm going to talk about the experiments with the chimps and the children.
I don't know if everyone saw that, but Craig passed that on to us. It was a 3-minute video about how chimps react to going through certain patterns, tapping on this and going through certain patterns for a reward, a candy that came out on the bottom of the box. But do you want to speak about that?
Yeah, I'll speak about it when you get the questions lined up.
No, I got the questions.
Okay.
No, but if you want to deal with that first.
Yes. It's very difficult for me to talk about the kind of education that children would get in the future, because a lot of people don't have similar experiences. I will try my best to get that information across to you. We don't do random experiments on animals and people. All the experiments done in terms of the Venus Project would mean how we relate to nature, how we relate to one another. For example, children would be taught how to draw pictures, how to use relationships in drawing pictures. When an artist draws, they don't always know what they're doing. They just develop slowly over a long period of time, and they cannot identify the process of educational ability to draw. They don't know what stages, what process level they use. They learn it automatically, just like you back away from fire, because you have heat sensors. What we do in the Venus Project is we raise children to be able to draw, but to draw pictures, all kinds of pictures. But they must understand the process they're involved in. They must understand the sequences which they make decisions. If they don't understand those things, if they're just reactions and actions, it's done with very little knowledge or understanding. It's hard for me to describe unless you were here, unless I have a chart and a drawing board to show you exactly that there are physical reasons, mental reasons for technical illustrators. When they draw, every line is based on information. When technical illustrators draw, they know how and why every line is made in the drawing. When artists draw, they don't understand that. They feel they have a feeling about it, but they don't understand the details. That's why it's difficult for artists to teach people to draw, because they don't know how they draw. They don't know what it is. They say, well, it's just something that I do. I've been doing it for years. But they don't explain things. For example, when you try to explain how a person walks, you don't know how to do that. You say, well, first I crawled, then I got up and I fell over, and then I learned to balance myself, and then I walked. That isn't description, although it may sound satisfactory to most people that don't know what a real description is. Description of walking. You have to take the weight off one leg and free it to move, and then you head that leg in a given direction. Then you take the weight off the other leg to free it to move and head it in another direction. That's only part, a small part of walking as described. When you study that, when you study walking that way, you can make a robot that walks. But if you don't study it, you go through a lot of random motions, a lot of unnecessary type of mechanics when you try to make a robot walk without identifying exactly what is walking. What is communication? When you talk to somebody, you ask them, do you know what I mean? What do you think I mean? And when they tell you what they got out of the conversation they had with you, you know whether they understood it as you meant it. I hope you understand that. When you communicate with other people, You want to communicate a certain set of values, a way of looking at things. If people say to me, there's not enough kindness in the world, I always ask them, what do you mean by kindness? What is your notion of it? That you have no locks on the door? That you feed all hungry people? That you bring them into your home? Oh no, that's not my notion of kindness. You have to find out what they're talking about, what they mean. And when you talk to them, you have to ask them, which sounds redundant, what do you think I mean? And then you'll know what they extract from what you say. We can't talk to each other due to the fact that our language was designed hundreds of years ago, and it makes it very difficult for us to even state a problem. We don't even know what it means to state a problem. So I'm going to try to give you some example. When we teach children to draw, we teach them how to determine where each line goes in the drawing, and how to ascertain, if you don't know where the lines go, what to look for. In other words, when I teach art, I hate to use that word, when I teach children to draw, they understand the reason for every line they make. And if you don't do that, you'll just be able to draw, but you don't know what's happening. Just like I'm using old language. On an unconscious level, you draw. You greet other people. You say to people, have a nice weekend, rather than have a nice life, which is what it's about. Why do you have to say, have a nice weekend, have a nice trip? You don't control the weather. You don't make a trip nice. But if you say, have a nice life, that doesn't mean anything unless you control their food, their substance, their exercise. You have to tell them how to have a nice life. Let me say that again. You can't tell a person to learn to balance themselves well so they can walk on top of a fence. You have to tell them how a person with a good sense of balance is able to walk on top of a very narrow path. They have a process level which they've developed. And if you don't have that process level, if you have fear of height and all that sort of thing, it interferes with the ability to walk on a narrow path. In other words, you have to give people specific detail on how to arrive at decisions or conclusions. Today, most people work on feeling tone. They feel that the person they're with is somebody they really like. But if you pin them down and say, what do you like about Jennifer? Well, they say, well, she's a very nice person. What does that mean exactly, very nice person? If you pin people down, particularly children, and give them reinforcement for every move that they make that's related to what they're doing, they will retain that information. But if you just show them how to hammer a nail into wood, I show them how to put the hammer, position the hammer in relation to the nail, and how to drive the nail directly downward or sideways or any way you want that nail to go. You don't just give them a hammer and whack on a nail. You have to show them the linear direction of the drive of the hammer to make that nail penetrate. I'm talking about nailing an object together. When children know the logic, when they're able to handle instruments at a particular angle, that depends on their age. From usually 6 to 7 to 8 years old, I find I can get the children with specific detail. When they're younger than that, I will devise a method to fit their age and experience. Without experience, you can't do a damn thing. Experience gives you specifics as to what to do to accomplish a given task. Let me say it another way. When a child wants to make something of clay, they make animals, and children, say 5 or 6 years old, the animals' proportions are awful. They're usually not based on experience. So before I have a child do any clay modeling or try to represent anything in the physical world, I teach them proportion, relationship, angularity, so they can look at a pointed roof of a building and say that's about 30 degrees or about 60 degrees. And so when they draw, they copy pretty close approximations of the physical world in front of them. I don't do random experiments to see how children react to light and shade. I teach them how to react to light and shade with the best information I'm able to accumulate. And we never tell children that what we're instructing you in is the best way. We say it's the best way we know of up to now. There may be better ways in the future. But we have to teach children how to react and what to react to, or whether they're reacting to personal feelings or whether they're reacting to specific laws. All human behavior is absolutely lawful, including drawing, painting, making models, doing sculpture work, is all based on specific laws. If you don't start out with the specific laws, you get into trouble. For example, you try to get children today to join the Mickey Mouse Club, which does absolutely nothing for children. It doesn't teach them anything. They have bears that talk and they have animals that talk. All that is irrelevant to real life. Children want to know things. They want to know what keeps the moon up there, since there's no wires that they can see. You have to show them magnetic fields. You have to demonstrate to whatever extent you can of objects that can influence one another without making physical contact, like a magnet can draw iron to it. How does it do that? How does a magnet work? You don't just say, well, magnets attract. That doesn't give them any information. When a teacher says to a child, that's wrong, there's no information in those words. Think about it. That's wrong. Doesn't tell you anything. When a teacher says to a child, that's not what I told you, that doesn't tell the child anything. You must stay with the subject, such as, if they spell cat with a K, say, we in America use the letter C, and you show them right away. You don't say, that's not what I told you, or you got it wrong. You got it wrong doesn't tell anybody anything. We have to learn to develop language that communicates specific values to a child. Now, what do I think of the chimp experiments? They're out of context with a serial development of learning. And now I'll try to answer questions. If you don't understand me, question what I said. That's the best thing you can do.
Before that, I just wanted to make a comment about some things going around the internet or our Facebook or wherever on some meetings that Jacques and I feel that the Corsan project is not necessary at this time, or whatever is going around. I don't know, I haven't seen it, I've heard it secondhand. This was a gross misunderstanding of what essentially I said, or what I meant, or what we wanted to see done. This was not true at all. We feel that the Corsan project is extremely necessary. So are the other projects that are at to rest. It was a misunderstanding. It was not our intent, and we're very excited about that project.
Go to it. You're doing a good job.
You want to repeat that? I just pulled the thing up again. Sorry.
I said go to it. Go to it. It's a good job you're doing with the Corsan project.
Yes, definitely. To go through some of these questions that I have here, I would like to know what Jacques thinks the ego is, and if we can possibly give it up.
Ego is based on early training on an unconscious level. What happens is you pat the child on the back for doing certain things, and they feel good about it. But rather than patting them on the back for doing certain things, you pat them on the back when they use the laws appropriately, meaning when they use experience appropriately, meaning as a child says, I can run faster than other children. That has nothing to do with the ability of a child. It has to do with the structure of the muscles, the type of activities they engage in, that gives them a wider range of running faster than other children. It depends on the length of their legs. It depends on so many things. It is not always the ability of the child that enables them to run faster. They pay no attention to those details. If certain children have a better memory than other children, it's because they may have had reinforcement in learning, whereas other children may not have had similar reinforcement in learning. So they don't feel great about it. They understand that they come from a different background and they haven't learned or have learned certain things. If a man learns to walk on a fence or a narrow path, he can't tell you how to do that. He says, well, get up there and practice. You can't practice if you don't know the laws. The laws is to blindfold a person and have them walk, and they can't maintain equilibrium as well with their eyesight. So you have to show how a person steadies himself on a platform. Ego is a process that has no real detailed explanation of events. It's a feel-good thing. It makes me feel good to be the best runner on the block. It makes me feel good to be able to bully people around. But bullying doesn't accomplish anything. And what you have to do is demonstrate the negative effects of bullying so a person doesn't even want to bully. In other words, you don't say stop bullying. You don't say don't do that, that's nasty, pushing other people around. That is not educational. Those are words which come from a person that doesn't like what they see, but they don't know how to stop it. The way you stop it is by exposing the insufficiency of that action pattern.
How do you do that?
By pointing out the insufficiencies of their action pattern. When you bully somebody, that doesn't alter their behavior except they have fear of you. In other words, bullying is done because a person has a low self-sufficiency. And to pick up that self-sufficiency, they push others or put others down. That's where racism comes in. That your race is the best race, any other race is not as good. That's an ego trip. That has nothing to do with the world of reality. Children do not react to Japanese, Afro-Americans. They play with anyone until mother comes over and says, you're a Lutheran, you don't play with that Catholic boy. If mother comes in with values that are irrelevant, they delay the development of the child. Ego is based upon feeling tone, no lawfulness.
I think it's based on insecurities too. And
I said that.
Well, you said low self-sufficiency, yeah. Okay, is there anything in the universe that is perfect?
Well, I don't know what you mean by perfect, but assuming that cannot undergo change, I see all things as changing. Eventually, the continents drift apart, the plants that used to exist do not exist today, the animals of 1 million years ago are different today than they were then. I see all things change. And if you use the word perfect, I don't know what you're talking about. Everything is always in equilibrium. There's no such thing as disequilibrium. In other words, if you hold a certain position, bend a certain way, you will straighten out. Every condition of matter is in equilibrium for the time being. Matter does not seek equilibrium. It is a process that all matter is acted upon by resident forces. That means that a sailboat cannot sail. It's moved by the wind. The area of the sail determines how effective the movement will be. The strength of the wind will determine how fast the boat will move. And every phase that boat's in is in equilibrium to the size of the sail, the velocity of the wind, the waves, all kinds of things go into making up the action of another object. A ball doesn't roll down the hill. It's pulled down by gravity. We say, look, the ball is rolling down the hill, as though the ball is doing that. Any inclined surface and any spherical object placed on an inclined surface will be pulled down by gravity. If the object is square, it may not move on the surface unless you increase the angle of incline.
Okay, this person is claiming that there are children that are very young that have information on complex things such as airplanes and how to fly them. Do you believe that this is true and that there is a reincarnation to explain this?
I do not accept reincarnation, but I can only tell you this, that if children seem to know a lot about airplanes, it's because their parents or their friends instructed them in that area. No child was ever born speaking English. You have to go to school to learn to speak English. Even if you're raised in China, no child was ever born speaking Chinese. They had to go to school. No child was ever born giving us numerical count without being exposed to 1 and 1 is 2, 2 and 2 is 4, 4 and 4 is 8, over and over again. You do not inherit experience. You have to encounter experience.
Do you recommend any books that would help somebody raise a child in your methods?
Well, even if you did that, they become alienated from their friends, which are brought up as normal. If you want your children to relate to the culture you live in, if you want to train them outside of the general system, you have to tell your children that ordinary children tend to say things like, I can run faster than you, I can draw better than you, I know things you don't know. You have to tell them what normal children are like. Normal children are messed up. And you have to tell them about that. But if you instruct your child in high correlation with the physical world, they won't be able to relate with normal children. Normal means mixed up, as I use the word. We are not sane enough yet to know how to use the world we live in. Proof: we make weapons of mass destruction. We make nuclear weapons. What can a nuclear weapon do for a nation? It can only make the earth radioactive, contaminate people, and build hatred in the world. What do military systems accomplish? Really nothing. They build delayed hatred over a period of time. You don't want military systems. What you want is to develop methods of solving human conflict and problems. There are many problems that are common to all the world's people. Cancer, heart disease, tuberculosis, diabetes. These are the problems common to all people, plus many others. That's what we have to work on. Solving problems, not using force to move people the way we want them to move.
Why didn't Jacques use his great mind to generate large sums of money throughout his life to get a budget to share his ideas with the world?
Because people will say, wasn't that the guy that made a lot of money in the stock market? Wasn't that the guy that abused a lot of people by making a lot of money for himself? I don't trust him. We don't trust people that only work for money.
And if Jacques spent his time learning how to make money and manipulating money, then he wouldn't know the things he knows now, I don't think. There's a question from Marcus from Miami. If you're listening to this, just give us a call, Marcus. It was about a project he's doing in Haiti. When, where, and how are you planning to start the first Venus Project city?
It isn't up to me. It's what other people do. How well you inform people and how many people make a decision saying, yes, we will build the first city. I have no power, no control. I own no broadcasting stations. I know that NBC is owned by General Electric, and they're not about to tell you the shortcomings of General Electric. You cannot have vested interest in control of anything. It tends to mock the concept of democracy. There's never been a democracy. People have always been manipulated by radio stations, broadcast, books, education.
And see, this is about language and literature, communication, general semantics. How will language and literature transform in the transition and post-transition stage? Novels, will we still have novels?
No.
Okay. Textbooks and reference materials, how will information be stored and read by people?
Information will be demonstrated visually. How water flows downhill. The water doesn't flow downhill, it's drawn by gravity. What makes vortexes and whirls in water? Everything will be demonstrated visually so that you have the same visual impression as another child. When children are learning in the future, they will learn by action patterns, by hands-on, by visual demonstrations. Words do not depict exactly the same thing to different people due to the difference in background.
Will we adapt a single language and transition into a new one?
Well, we'll transition into a new one. The new language must be universal and have a physical reference for everything you talk about.
Will we have movies, podcasts, YouTube?
Yes, you'd have all that, but what is on it is different than what you see today.
Every procurement method, such as partnering construction, management, and design, or design and build, has its own advantages and disadvantages. I was wondering which one is adapted to do the project, or have you got another way to manage the project?
Yes, you have to ask yourself, what is it that you hope to accomplish? What is it you want? Then try your system. If it doesn't do what you want, your system has to be altered. In other words, you have to ask yourself, what is a city for? What do people do in the city? What are their needs? And the city has to be designed to be able to take people or transport people to any point in that city with a minimum expenditure of energy in the most efficient manner. If you wish to improve conditions all over the world, you cannot build every car different looking. In other words, if they made automobiles so every car was individually designed for each person, they would cost you about $1 million a piece. Automobiles are designed and they're stamped out to look alike. All cars, like particularly Volkswagen or Chevy, looks like a Chevy. That's where you cut the cost, by making them uniform. But if you make every house very different from one another, you cannot house the people of the world. If you make every refrigerator a different size, the cost would be prohibitive. Do you understand that? Some people say, well, will we all be alike? Well, in certain areas we'll all be alike. We wouldn't want to hurt one another. We'll be alike that way. We would never declare war on another country. We'll be alike that way. We will try to teach people things rather than say, I know more about it than you do. All the language today is old, designed hundreds of years ago, which makes it very difficult to talk to one another. I'm sorry I repeat myself, but it's always the same problems. If you understand, which is a very difficult word, if you understand the process by which nations behave a certain way, if you understand what makes patriotism, what makes crime, what makes aberrant behavior, you can correct it. If you don't, if you think, well, some people are good and some are bad, that's not science. That's opinions. In other words, you have to know what makes people behave the way they do, and you have to know what the factors are in their environment that makes them behave the way they do. When you know that, you have to also know the methods of undoing a certain value system, of modifying it. Without that knowledge, you cannot change people.
The group of people who dedicate their lives for the betterment of mankind, the scientists, researchers, engineers, architects, could find this system, the Venus Project, unfair if they were to be rewarded in the same way as the average Joe who are just parasitic in the system?
Well, first of all, people need certain things to survive. They need clean air, water, clean water. They need a relevant education, meaning an education that corresponds with the nature of the physical world. Without that, they cannot respond appropriately. All people need the best we can give them in education, nutrition, warmth, love. Every human being needs that. To the extent that you negate that, you cause behavioral disturbances.
And problems that will come back against those people who feel they would need to be rewarded more as well. And those people who are working towards making this system better really understand the significance that environment has upon people and understand that they have to create a constructive and participatory environment for people as quickly as possible. And they would get their kicks out of seeing the environment improve for everyone, not to get rewarded for it in some physical manner, a materialistic manner.
The reward is inherent in the fact that there's less crime,
That's right.
No wars, no loss of life, no bombing of cities. That's your reward. A world that works together, where everybody makes a contribution. For example, in the future, there'll be no advertising, no lawyers, no investment bankers, no one that adds nothing to the well-being of people. Everyone will be trained to help make the world a better place. Continuous improvement.
And that is part of the job, too, to create an environment where everybody has access to education in order to become participatory.
Well
And there will be people who understand that and take that on and understand that it makes their lives better if more people are working towards this.
Self-centeredness will bring on the destruction of our world. National pride separates people. All people need the same thing. When you really get down to it, you'll find that all people need good food, clean water, clean air, and a decent environment, meaning education as to how to relate to one another and how to avoid conflict, how to accept the differences in where different people draw different conclusions rather than argue with people. You accept the fact that different people may have a different approach to problems, but you can learn how to check out their approach to know whether it's a valid approach or based on ego. Ego is when a person says it'll never work without pointing to specifics. Ego is, well, I can run faster than you, or I can sing better than you can. When you push yourself, but if you share your ideas with other people, that's called extensionality. I see the future of being very extensional to one another, rather than I can run faster than you. That's an ego trip. And anything that's centered around the individual without sharing with another person their knowledge would be egocentric behavior.
This question, what is the difference between the Venus Project and the Zeitgeist Movement? I heard there was a fight between Jacques Fresco and Peter Joseph. What is this about? I wouldn't say there was a fight.
No, it's just a matter of approach. Peter Joseph points out the shortcomings of the culture, and he points out how banks operate and how the Federal Reserve System is not a federal institution. He points out many useful, many good things. But when he was asked, what can you do about it? This he got from the Venus Project. The Venus Project is what to do about it. How to design buildings so they're more efficient. How to design buildings in earthquake regions where they don't cave in. How to make things happen. How to raise children so they're better adjusted. The Venus Project is the process level. The Zeitgeist Movement points out the shortcomings of our present-day society, but in the past did not come up with what to do about it.
Yes, and we really had very little to do with the Zeitgeist Movement. We felt it really wasn't that cooperative. We weren't involved in it. and yet it was using the Venus Project's designs and name and work, and so, you know, in regards to a resource-based economy and as well, but since we didn't have much to do with it, we felt it was going off in different directions and didn't really want to, if things did go in different directions, we didn't want to have our name associated with it if we had no say in it and we were not responsible for the way it was going, so we had to pull out. Somebody was asking about the video Earth 2.0. They seem to be on the same page with our approach. I guess they want to keep the monetary-based system. I haven't seen the final video if it's out. I don't even know if it's out yet. If it is, if somebody could send us a link, that would be great. This person says, I've watched an interview with Jacques Fresco and Larry King. Jacques has been working all his life, publicly talking about it for over 50 years. 40 years ago, he was able to foresee this. It's very impressive. Let's see, what's the question? A lot of things have changed except for our stupidity. What a shame. Okay, how come he hasn't lost his faith and quit already, since you've been at it for so long? How come you haven't lost your faith in it?
Oh, well, it's not a question of losing faith in people. It's understanding where people are at. And you have to take people from where they're at, what school they went to, what their value system is. You have to take that into account. If you want to change people, you have to deal with those things. Becoming discouraged means giving up. And I cannot accept the world as it is. We're moving toward nuclear war, environmental destruction, which doesn't make sense to me. The amount of suffering will be enormous unless we do something about it. What do you do about it? We have to work on changing people. We have no choice.
Was it Jules Verne's, or who was the one who...
Futurist?
Yeah, who got disappointed because he had expectations?
No, that's H.G. Wells.
H.G. Wells, yes.
H.G. Wells died very bitter. He figured the world should be far ahead. But whatever happens in the world is real. What H.G. Wells thought should happen is not real. That's his own projections. So what disappointed him was not the world, was his own expectations. If you expect your lover or your partner to behave a certain way and they don't, you get mad at them. It's not their fault. Your expectations are wrong. You don't know how to evaluate people. Whatever people do is real. What you think they should have done is unreal. If one nation goes to war with another and you say, well, that's awful. Well, you're projecting their own values because you didn't work on changing people so they wouldn't want to go to war.
This person is asking, why do we not take actions and make demands to build a city?
Well, it depends on the work you do and how many people you convince. If you don't work on other people, they're bound to stick to the values they've been given by their culture.
Jacques often mentions that we never make mistakes in our lives because we learn what works and what doesn't through trial and error, and then update our methods and values. But what if someone knowingly repeats the error again? Would that then be a mistake?
No, most politicians are sponsored by other people. Like if you put up $1 million to help someone get elected, you owe them, or they owe you a favor. Don't you see that? The people that put up money to help people win elections have things they want done of the people that are elected. So since you use a money system, you cannot attain democracy. When Jesus chased the money changers out of the temple, they're all back in now and they control everything. By buying politicians, by paying off certain people, by paying off judges. Even the Supreme Court judges would be considered criminals in the future. They do the same thing because they use money to, you say, knowingly do something that you would call a mistake. They do it for money or position or reward of some kind.
Okay. Okay, putting aside moralism and subjective values, how does Jacques see masturbation with sexual fantasies in terms of mental health today, and on the other hand, in the future, a society like the Venus Project envisions? Is there
Oh, I
anything you
can
want to
say that
address?
in the future, people will have sex relations when they're able to, 14 to 15 years old. You don't inhibit those things. If you do inhibit those things, you produce artificial fantasies. You produce all kinds of aberrant behavior. When you put a man in prison and deprive him of normal sexual relations, they have relations with one another. But that's only temporary as long as they're in prison. Whenever you try to conceal or falsify human feelings are based upon experience. And if we raise children to be cooperative, work together, and learn how to solve rather than get into arguments, they will learn how to say, did you put that to test? What were your results? And they will learn how to check things out rather than follow the leader. I don't want anybody to follow me. I want them to listen to what I say. If it makes sense, do it. If it doesn't, question it.
Can someone self-condition himself?
No, not possible.
He's explaining that, for example, to read or study habits with the methods applied to kids described on Jacques' videos. Through books, could they condition themselves?
You have to teach people lettering, a T, a J, and the type of stuff we associate with certain letters put together. When you make up a word, the child has to learn what the letters represent. And it doesn't mean that they represent anything that makes sense, but that's the society you live in. The society you live in stands for certain events, but they're all subject to interpretation, which is a terrible thing. We need a language that is not subject to interpretation so people don't go off in all kinds of different directions. You cannot build the Venus Project unless it conforms with the teachings of the Venus Project. Now, the teachings or the information in the Venus Project is not what Jacques Fresco dictates. It's first doing a survey of the carrying capacity of a given environment and maintain a population in accordance with the carrying capacity of the Earth's resources, not Fresco's opinions.
Getting back to this, can reading recondition somebody?
No, because reading is not experience. You can read to your child all the horrors of war, but seeing people blown to smithereens will change your behavior regarding war.
I would like to know if Jacques believes in determinism. It means, for example, if we knew all the factors that shape a person, could we actually predict his behavior and, quote, choices?
All choices are made by the culture you live in. An Eskimo never says, I'd like a Mercedes-Benz. It's outside of his frame of reference. If you go to a Seminole Indian and ask him, what would you like? He doesn't say, I'd like three-dimensional TV set. It's outside of his frame of reference. Therefore, a person cannot surpass or exceed the culture he's been brought up in unless he travels, sees movies, or learns how to meet with different kinds of people in the world. His methods of evaluation become broadened if he travels or she travels and they experience different things. Then you have a multiplicity of values. But if you're just brought up in Weehawken County, Virginia, you're a Weehawkenite. You can't think outside of your culture. No one can. Even Leonardo da Vinci observed certain leaves falling and spinning, and the propeller that he devised was based upon what he observed. Leonardo da Vinci associated with different people than the average person associated with. He associated with people that talked of gears, levers, and things he was interested in. He did not evolve on his own. Although once you begin to associate with people that think differently, it becomes more stimulating and more exciting. And so if you do that privately, you lose contact with the average person.
I want to get back to this and have you go over this in a little bit different way. Do you believe in determinism? If you knew the factors that shaped a person, could you actually predict their behavior?
Yes, you can, if you knew the factors and knew how to apply them. You can predict behavior. What do you think a medical school is? What do you think aircraft training is? When people learn to fly, they go to an aviation environment and they all turn out. Some pilots are better than others due to previous experience riding a bicycle, by feeling things in the seat. When they sit in an airplane, they feel centrifugal force. They feel differently than people not trained in that. When you ride a bicycle, it gives you a propensity toward maintaining a better sense of balance than a person without any experience on a bicycle. So the propensity is set early in life. Sometimes a person gets in an airplane and they just can't make a good landing. They don't have enough experience in the process for making decisions and ascertaining the position of the aircraft in relation to the ground. But experienced people try to keep the aircraft related to the horizon line. They have different methods, which the person who's a bad pilot is a person that doesn't have the methods that is used by what you call a competent pilot. A competent person is one with experiences that are relevant to the activity they're engaged in. When you learn to be a surgeon, you watch expert surgeons work. You watch how they use clamps, hemostats. Without a medical environment, you cannot pick up the latest techniques. So when you want a person to be an architect, you put them in an architectural environment. Think about that. If you want a person to be a circus acrobat, you put them on a swing and show them how to turn and when to leave the swing and how to hang on to the swing and how to do a backflip. He doesn't do a backflip right away. He wears a belt and there are two ropes coming off the belt and you help him to do a backflip. You show him how by actuating the ropes and instructing him in how to jump up in the air and when to turn over. The more instruction you have, the more vivid the instruction, the more physical the instruction, the better the student. That's why they put people in a dummy airplane first, and he learns to move the controls. Then they put him in a real airplane, and they show him how to check the water content of the gasoline. They show him how to check the tire pressure on airplanes. The more instruction you have, the more competent you become. But if you have a background of checking tire pressure, you don't need all that instruction. So some people have a propensity toward becoming a better pilot than the average person. That's due to their background prior to flight training. And if you have a background in biology, curiosity on organisms and animals, you have more to bring to that field. For example, if you work in Hollywood and you want to create a monster from another planet, the more books you look at with insects and fish and octopi, all kinds of animals, the more pictures you have in your mind, the greater the creativity. If you never look at a book of insects, you can't create a Martian. The people that create Martians, you usually make their fingers look like crab claws and their head look like a grasshopper's head. Where do they get that? By combining different images from magazines on insects or books on insects. The more differences that you look at, the broader your creativity. Creativity is not inborn. It's based on experience and the amount of images that you've stored over the years.
I know we've done this question a couple of times before, but I'll do it again. Could Jacques explain his concept of time?
Well, I have a different concept of time than other people. I can't, if you put an apple out in the sun and leave it there for 40 hours, it changes its appearance. Time we relate with change. If you meet a certain person and some years go by, there's change. A refrigerator, to a certain extent, is a sort of a time machine. It halts the change. If you put a fish outdoors, it'll decompose in a few days. If you put it in the refrigerator, it kind of slows up the decomposition of the fish. So it's a sort of a time machine when you think about it. It diminishes or halts change. It slows up change. And so if we measure time by change, and that's what you do, when a child is 7 years old, they look a certain way. When they're 70 years old, they look another way. That's how you measure time, by change. So in the future, if you could halt change, you can stop time.
I agree that environment shapes behavior, but what changes the environment?
No environment can remain constant or the same because the weather changes, the trees undergo change, the crop yield. If you have a warm summer and it starts earlier, you get an earlier crop. So the changes in the environment change people. You cannot freeze an environment and keep it one way. In ancient times, the king tried to keep things that would support his values. But as time goes on, new changes occur. New weapons of war are developed. If a king likes his weapons of war and he sticks with that, and another nation says, in order to invade that country, we have to have better weapons than they have. And if they encourage innovation, they could surpass another country. If we don't look ahead, we will be surpassed by other nations. If America doesn't consider the future and consider the values that we have and how it relates to the world, other nations will. So no nation can freeze their values and retain upper class or upmanship unless they change with the times. So nations that are unable to change will be surpassed.
Also depends on what they change to, and that's why we feel the Venus Project is so important, to lay out a direction to change more appropriately.
Well stated, Roxanne.
Would it be possible at some point in the future that the majority of people wouldn't want to have kids, and there is still no method of artificial raising? Artificial raising, I don't know what the question is exactly. Would there be some time in the future where people wouldn't want to have kids?
Well, there will be certain people that wouldn't want to have children, and some people will. We already have 7 billion people on Earth. If we exceed the productive capacity of the carrying capacity of the Earth's resources, we will have territorial disputes, arguments, and conflict. If you try to live without taking into account what the environment can support, you're going to have trouble proportionate to the amount of excess you have. You must maintain a population in accordance with the carrying capacity of the Earth's resources. I've said that many times. If you violate natural law, you will pay for it. You cannot violate natural law. All man-made laws are BS, bad science, and they don't correspond to natural law. That's why people violate it.
I think in the future people will want to have children less also because there would be so many options for them to do. Today it's really pushed in the society. Your aims are to get married, have children, have a steady job, and a house. But those really won't be the aims and the values of the future.
I agree with that.
Several times it's mentioned that the transition is going to be tough. I think it will be. What are you going to do during the transition? Is there a guarantee that you will survive? By you, I mean Jacques and Roxanne and others from the Venus Project as well, and all the Venus Project materials and works.
That I can't answer. I can be shot by someone who thinks that I'm Antichrist. and I only want to work on the material world, that I don't include the spiritual aspects. To me, a world without war, without hostility, without bigotry, racism, greed, is spiritual. I think that the Venus Project is a very spiritual organization.
Yeah, as you always say, it's translating all the wisest religious teachings and philosophies into a working reality. Yeah, how to make it real for people other than just lip service is what the spiritualists and the religious people do today, I think. What is the best thing for us to do during the transition? I would say keep learning about this direction so you can talk to other people about it and introduce it in any way you can, and join the different groups and the core groups for specific things that you could help with. How likely is it to have a nuclear war or a third world war?
We almost had it with Cuba. And if Khrushchev didn't take the missiles out of the Cuba, we may have gotten into a nuclear war. We're very close. China has nuclear weapons, America has nuclear weapons, and many other countries have nuclear weapons. So the possibility of nuclear war is there all the time, unless you go to work. If you sit back and say, well, it's no use, nothing will happen. If you work the best you know how up to now in changing people, you stand a chance of avoiding nuclear war. If you do nothing, nothing will happen.
How to fight that the Venus Project is not one of utopia theories of the last century. How to fight that. Yeah, how do we explain how the Venus Project is not one of the utopian theories of the last century?
Just by describing the advantages to everyone living in the Venus Project, showing how transportation is safer, how we share ideas, how we train more engineers in this system. If you haven't got the money to go to college, the nation loses. The more scientists you have, the more people working on heart disease and cancer, the more research facilities that are made available to research labs rather than digging up pennies or nickels and dimes for research in heart disease. We give every lab whatever the hell they need to do the job.
This is an involved question. How can we undo indoctrination from the society, he says USA, that we're living in? Specifically, how can we reverse present personal issues such as fetishes, addictions in ourselves and others caused by physical, verbal, or sexual abuse, and external violence, war or stress, etc.?
First, you have to show people how they get to be the way they are, so they don't think it's inborn. Once they know how they get to be the way they are, they can understand how different people can behave differently and arrive at different conclusions than they do. Rather than get mad at them, they understand the environment they're coming from and try to show them the factors that shape their values and producing in them an open-mindedness, meaning a broader concept of the way people react. Once they understand the effects of environment on values and behavior, they can also understand that they themselves may not have a relevant point of view, but may be affected by society as a whole. If they understand that, they stand a better chance of affecting a transition in their own behavior.
During the transition toward the Venus Project, how will the people in power or people not willing to participate in the Venus Project be handled, provided the majority of the population is willing to be part of the Venus Project?
Well, if you have people that are not able to join the direction of the Venus Project, it doesn't take everybody. That's a thing I've answered many times. Perhaps our world is really on the backs of no more than 100 people. Louis Pasteur, Madame Curie, Edison, Tesla. Very few people made all the devices that comprise our civilization today. You don't have to convince everybody. You just have to convince very few people in places with the capacity to change things. The people that you have to influence are agronomists, architects, engineers, scientists as a rule, because the layman usually doesn't know what to do about things. Although they may not like things, they may go on strike, or they may parade outside the stock exchange without putting in a new method. What do you do about it? How do you overcome the problem? You still maintain the same system unless you come up with what to do about it.
Yes, I had a good suggestion from somebody who called yesterday to print out our reaction to Occupy movement. And if you're near different movements, that they're in your cities, print out as many flyers as you can on that and pass them out amongst the people who are sitting in or who are in the streets. That would be very helpful to introduce the Venus Project as well.
If the majority of people don't want to go along with it, you're going to have a more difficult transition. The more people you can influence, the smoother the transition. I have no control of that.
When very young children fight with each other, say around 5 years old, over toys or something they deem valuable, how would the Venus Project deal with that behavior?
Children are raised under different circumstances than one that will bring about a fight over toys. That's conventional patterns, the way it is today. In the future, when children are raised together, they're raised so that that does not occur. In other words, you have avoidance behavior. So when you raise children, you raise them very young and you begin to control their behavior while they're growing up. You don't wait till they get into a fight over projects, over objects, over toys, or over anything that children fight about. Somehow they were raised in an environment that gave them those attitudes. We don't raise them in that type of environment. Where one child has a toy that's very animated and very colorful, and another child doesn't have access to that toy. When they don't have access to that toy, they get angry. So we raise children in an environment that does not produce aberrant behavior. We now know enough about human behavior to know what the conditions are and what not to do. If you don't apply that, you'll have the same problems over and over again.
This person is asking about Heron Stone's work to create a new form of English known as Earthling, and it's based on Korzybski's book, Science and Sanity. He focuses on understanding our language machine and giving people the ability to communicate clearly. He's in the process of developing a curriculum. Do you know of him? Have you heard of him?
Yes, I know of Korzybski.
No, I mean, Heron Stone is doing work based on Korzybski.
Yeah, Stone's work doesn't touch the economy that generates aberrant behavior. And as long as you don't touch the social system, you're not going to change anything, no matter how much you change language. It isn't language, it's the social design that produces Nazis, fascists, socialists, communists. All of them are produced by the social institutions. You have to change the social institutions to change behavior. You cannot change behavior by writing a book on the new language or the better use of words. As long as there's poverty, hunger, disequilibrium, you're going to have problems.
Do you have any objections to being nominated to the Nobel Peace Prize?
Only if it serves to present the concepts of the Venus Project, yes, I would like it, if it helped further the Venus Project. If it doesn't, I have no interest in it.
It'd be kind of contradictory when Obama was given the Nobel Peace Prize the same day he was putting in more troops in Afghanistan. How do you combat laziness?
Laziness is generated by the environment. If you give kids incentive, if you pat them on the back for doing things, that was very nice of you to wash the car. Would you like to go to a movie? If you reinforce behavior, that is constructive. But if you keep putting behavior upon people that they don't like. When you get through mowing the lawn, wash the damn car, get off your butt and do something. That is not reward. Reward means recognizing things that children do. If you notice your kid sharing with other children knowledge, objects, he says, you can play with my toy whenever you like to. If you pat him on the back and say, that was very nice of you to do that, reinforce behavior that's constructive and pay no attention to behavior that's not constructive.
Many people say or ask that the Venus Project doesn't have any solutions. They have pictures and models of cities, but no engineering plans and solid designs for a resource-based economy. Talking about a resource-based economy is not a solution, but an idea. What solutions does the Venus Project have? What should I talk about when informing people about the solutions of the Venus Project?
That's why we ask people, if you want to study medicine, you go to a university. If you want to study engineering, you go to an environment that teaches engineering. If you want details, you come out to the Venus Project and you will get instructions in specific detail, but you will not be given instructions in patentable bits. Because if you take out patents on what the Venus Project proposes, then you stop the Venus Project from designing new concepts. Don't you see that? If I give out detail of how to prevent automobiles from hitting one another, then you got a patentable object. I can't take out patents on everything I think about. There are thousands of different inventions. So I only talk about it in general, not specifically. But if you come out here to the Venus Project, I will demonstrate and show you, if I know what your intentions are.
Well, you said it stops people from coming up with new ideas when you hand out the designs. I think you probably meant it stops us from being able to use those ideas. If somebody else patents it, then we would have to pay them to use the design. That's true even with open source, because they just change it a little bit and then patent it. We do have blueprints and designs here, and we are developing more. We will be developing more with our teams, our architectural teams and our engineering teams. But we have a lot of designs here. We just don't hand them out. We don't give them away because of that reason. But present a lot of it through designs and demonstrations and blueprints. I mean, not blueprints, but pictures and models. But everything that Jacques designs in his sketches and his drawings and his models, he also designs, and he also has a lot of blueprints and sketches on how to build them and how they go together and what the factories would look like to be able to mass produce those products as well. So it's not just a pretty picture. When will the material of the Venus Project, seminars, videos, etc., be on mediums like iTunes? Well, we're working on all that too. We're trying to get our book into Kindle and other things. But there's really just a couple people here working on that, and we're overloaded. If anybody wants to help in that area, let us know. Jacques always underlines that people who know nothing or only a little about certain subjects should not make a statement about it, because this statement may be worthless because of lack of knowledge. So my question is, how many cases of alleged reincarnation has Jacques researched to make the statement that there is no reincarnation? How much have you researched in reincarnation to make that statement?
Reincarnation is a wish that people have. They would all like to believe that they come back again. But look, when you think about it, you've got to be very, very honest. No one was ever reincarnated speaking ancient Egyptian. I've been around hundreds of different seances, metaphysical meetings, and I've never heard anybody come up with any knowledge. I meet a lot of young women that tell me they were an Egyptian princess in a former life. So I say, what did your undergarments look like? What did you use for a sink? What did the sink look like in ancient Egypt? What was the method you used for flushing the John? And what did you use for a mirror? You can get that information from museums. And so I got a lot of information first from museums. No one was able to describe what their undergarments looked like. No one that believed in reincarnation was able to describe detail. In particular, World War One. I said, what type of plane did you fly? He said, a SPAD. I said, what were the instrument panels like? He didn't know. And if he was reincarnated and he came from another time, he would have specific information. I never got any information. I never got any information about the flight into the Twin Towers. No one ever put a news article out saying, hey, there's going to be a flight into the Twin Towers. 2 airplanes will do that. I got no information on the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor before Pearl Harbor. Where are all these psychics that know all these things? Why don't they speak up in advance and say China will do this or North Korea will do that? I never get any information. So all I can ask you to do is check it out. Learn how to check the times that a people believe they were reincarnated from. If you lived in ancient Egypt, ask them how the pyramids were built, how they lifted those heavy stones, how they moved them great distances. If they lived in ancient Egypt, if they were architects then, they should have a hell of a lot of information. But if they have no information, you know it's projection. You know that they're projecting their own values. So they say they move the heavy stones by levitating them. Well, there's no evidence of levitation anywhere on Earth at any time in history. And that's the only thing I can go by.
This person is saying, has a lot of questions about collapse. What if the world economies do not collapse? Should we find scientific method to demonstrate clear when the system will collapse? Can you explain why you think this system will collapse?
It's collapsing all over the world. I don't think it'll collapse. You read about nations and people revolting against their leaders and calling for more democracy. Well, even if they got into power, they don't know what to do. They really don't have a blueprint of what to do about it. Whereas the Venus Project has a blueprint for every inch of the way, from transportation to education to lifestyles, and redefining many terms that we use today so they have closer meanings so that people can understand the words they use.
How do you determine if a teenager wants to live alone? Do they have access to that?
If a teenager wants to live alone, it means that they found people not extensional to their needs. They found other people detracting from their direction. But in the future, when people share ideas with others, everyone becomes extensional to one another, useful to one another. There's nobody there to take advantage of you. There's nobody that says, I got just the car you're looking for, or I got just the house you're looking for. There's nobody out there to sell you anything. People help one another. So you don't want to be away from people. You don't want to be alone. Only if you're disrupted by other people do you want to be alone.
Okay, I guess that's it for now. Thanks very much for listening. We appreciate your questions.
Yes, we consider it a privilege to try to answer your questions. I don't know whether I answer every question, but all I'm saying is that if you carefully check things, you'll find out that a Frenchman speaks with a French accent, which he picks up from his environment. You'll find that a German speaks with a German accent, which he picks up from his environment. You'll find that environment shapes behavior if you're honest and ask questions. If a man tells me in a former life he was a hunter in the Amazon jungle, ask him how his arrows were made, how you bound the arrow tip to the tip of the arrow itself, and how did you glue the feather on the back of the arrow. Ask them detailed questions. If they are reincarnated, they can answer that. If they're not, they say, well, I don't remember. then they're phonies. That's how you can tell.
Yes, and I wanted to thank everybody for the work that you're doing in this direction. It's really appreciated and wonderful. Would want to remind everybody to join the study groups for the book, The Best That Money Can't Buy, to get a good background on this direction before going out and speaking with people as well.
Thanks, Jack and Roxanne. I just want to jump in quickly before we close this off today. Just want to reiterate some points for everyone, and especially for those new to TVP activism and the global teams. If you go to the Venus Project's website, the new website, www.thevenusproject.com, under the top menu, Get Involved, you'll find the links just below there for TVP Core, TVP Design and TVP Support. That's our global activism and support teams, where you can find all the different sort of teams and projects that we'll be working on over the coming months, years. If you feel that you can help out on any of those, there's instructions on each of those pages on how you can get involved with the different teams and projects. We'd also recommend anyone that hasn't already read The Best That Money Can't Buy, which is the book by Jack Fresco on his solutions that he's arrived at over the last 75 years of research and development, the resource-based economy. You can find a link in there as well for where to buy the book on their store. Thanks everyone for coming, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Andrew.
Again, Andrew.
Thank you.
Again.
Thank you again, Andrew, for everything you're doing.
Yes, we appreciate that, Andrew.
No problem, it's a pleasure. Thanks all. Bye.